Did you know that you can find out the size of any drill bit by looking at the base of it? Sometimes it might be tricky to see, but hold it up against the light. I can see this one better with my eyes, and this is a size 8. It's also a masonry drill bit. I can tell by the arrow shape on the top, which is especially designed for drilling through brick and stone. So even better news is that the plugs often tell you what size they are as well. It's typical, but here I've picked up one that doesn't actually say. But for the most part, they will, like these ones. And with a bit of practice, you'll be able to tell what size a plug is just by looking at it. I happen to know that that first grey one is also a size 8, because I can compare it to this one. It's also a lot smaller than the size 10, which is the next size up that I have. For the project that I'm doing today, I'm going to need 3. Let me show you what we're going to be working on today. A little while back, I showed you this guttering being installed. I redirected it so I could catch rainwater in that water barrel. I didn't like the finished look too much. I thought it was a bit messy. So I asked you in the comments, how could I do this better? And you suggested running the guttering around the corner to come down the other side of the porch. So I picked up a few bits to make this happen. I bought some new guttering. From memory, I think this is 2.4 metres. It's a pretty standard size, so even though my original guttering was bought a while ago, it will still fit. And here's the tools I'm going to be using today. I'm going to be using my electric saw to cut through the pipe, but this is really not necessary. You can do it with a handsaw. These are the other 2 main bits that I picked up. This is a bracket to hold the new guttering onto the wall, and this is a corner piece. Aside from redirecting the guttering before, I've never actually done any guttering work before, so this is something we're learning together. I'm going to start by removing the bits that are already there. Where possible, I'm going to try and make use of the materials that I already have. I don't like to waste things. This screw did not want to come out, and I realised that my drill was getting a little bit short of battery. Because I couldn't get it out, I tried a couple of different ways to wiggle it out. When I redirected this guttering before, I glued it into place because it kept on falling out. These brackets are quite old and they were not keeping the pipe in place by itself. Turns out I just had to give it a little wiggle. Pop! Because this is my first time, I'm not entirely sure how these bits go together. There was a leak here that I repaired a little while back and it is stuck in so well. Don't yet know how I'm going to get that apart. This end piece was the first to give. That faces me judging the cleanliness of my guttering. What a thing to be self-conscious about. I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's fine if my guttering is not clean. Nobody look! I realised I could see a screw once I'd removed the end. I wanted to show you what it looks like. Up close and personal. Sometimes it's just easier to see these things firsthand. I tried to get in there with my drill, but it wasn't proving to be very easy. That's because I needed a slightly longer drill bit. Didn't stop me trying for a bit longer though. Too stubborn to go downstairs. It's because I've already set the camera up. It might be a little bit easier if I remove this part of the pipe first, but I ended up relenting and going to get the longer drill bits. And of course, I took my phone with me. We can't have anyone cashing in on that 5-finger discount, can we? I found 2 longer drill bits. They are both the wrong size, which is the exact reason why I was able to find them. The screw is crossed at the top, so the flat one isn't ideal for this job, but if it fits, then I'm just going to use it. The second one that I showed you is the right shape, but it's too thick at the very tip. It's designed for a larger screw, so it's not going to likely fit into this one, which was confirmed to me very quickly. I dropped it on the floor. I tried the drill bit with the flat head and quickly realised that it was too long for this screw. So neither of these drill bits have worked. I went back to removing the sealant from this joint so that I could remove this second half of the pipe. When it was no longer in the way, I noticed that the second screw was in at an angle. It would have been screwed in at an angle, probably a bit like this, which is why I'm able to take it back out at this angle as well. Look how delighted I am. I look like I want a medal or something. I still couldn't get that screw out. So I had to do something that I very, very rarely do these days. I had to use a hand tool. Blah. That's honestly how I feel about it. I joke, there's nothing wrong with using screwdrivers, but when you've got 3 different types of drills, you just become very accustomed to things happening very fast. But it doesn't mean they can do every job well, as we can see here. This ended up being a super quick job. All that time that I spent faffing around, and this was done in a few minutes. I wanted to see if the bit of guttering that I hadn't yet taken down was long enough to simply plug into the corner piece. It wasn't, so I'm going to have to cut a new piece for that section. The brackets for the guttering hold the guttering in such a way that it's fairly easy to clip into place, but actually quite difficult to get it out. I decided to go for sliding this out rather than unclipping. I'll be salvaging this end piece and installing it on my new longer piece that I'm going to cut now. But don't worry, the piece that was too short is still going to come in handy because it's long enough to fit around the corner from where it was. I'm also going to reuse the hopper. That's the piece that takes the water down. It's still in fairly good nick, despite the fact that it's absolutely filthy and covered in all sorts of adhesive. I'm reconnecting a lot of these bits to reflect how the guttering looked before. This is the same way that the pipes were organised before, except they'll now be round the corner. Now it's time for me to cut this piece to size. The name of the type of measuring that I'm using here is called the "that sort of looks about right" method. I held it up against the wall with a little bit of struggle. It was difficult to balance the corner piece on top, but this way works for me. I think a lot of people prefer measuring with a measuring tape. That doesn't really work for me. My brain just doesn't seem to work that way. So here I'm just marking with a permanent marker where it is that I need to cut. You'll notice I'm doing this on a strange part of the wall. The wall is the same width at the top as it is where I'm standing, and I'm trying to not make this more difficult for myself than it needs to be. I wanted to give you a close-up of how I know where to mark. The guttering tells you this is where you need to cut it to. That's how much overlap there needs to be. I estimated how far this corner piece needed to be away from the wall based upon how far away from the wall the previous guttering was. If you can see that slight dash there, that's the mark that I've made with the permanent pen. And for this far right side, I have left a space in between the wall and the guttering. I don't want those to be butting up together. That will most likely cause water to trickle down the wall. I'm going to cut down the guttering to the right size. And first of all, I tried to do this by leaning it up against this bench. But this bench is very rickety, and it turns out this guttering is not that easy to cut. It's because it's quite flimsy and you can't really get a good purchase on it. So I used my steps instead, as I was able to rest myself against this and keep it more secure. Do you remember earlier when I said it seemed like my battery was about to run out on my drill? Well, that's because it was. A saw like this takes quite a lot more power than a drill, so it ran out very quickly. I replaced it with my other battery, but that had run out too. And you may be wondering, why don't you just charge your batteries? That's a very sensible question. Thing is, I lent my orbital sander to my sister, who is resanding her floors throughout her house. The tool I lent her kept on running out of battery, so I said, here, take the charger. I'm probably not going to need it. Borrow it for as long as you like. Turns out I need it, but big up to my sister for redoing her floors. They're looking really good as well. Anyway, turns out this is another job that's over-engineered because it worked perfectly well with a handsaw. Albeit a little bit tricky because the plastic is so flimsy. This piece for down the side is now the perfect size, but I do still need to cut a new fresh piece for the front. I've again utilised the end bit, and although this guttering is designed to the same standard, these two parts are from different batches from different periods of time, so there was some slight tolerance issues. By that I mean it was really hard to get this ruddy thing on. In the end, I used a tool to make sure that it was securely on the end, and that tool was my foot. Yeah, I kicked it into place. I went back again to the "that sort of looks about right" method to work out how long this piece needed to be at the front. I did this whilst also trying to balance the other piece to make it less likely that I'd make any blindingly obvious mistakes. I lined up the far left with the edge of the porch because that's where the other guttering finished as well. I used the guide inside of the corner piece to tell me where I needed to cut. I realised this would be a good opportunity to tell you a little bit more about how I'm using my handsaw. If you try to saw something flat on the surface like this, it skips around and it makes a real mess of the face of your work. If, however, you start at an angle on a corner and make a few sharp scores, it means that the saw doesn't skip and you'll end up with a much straighter line. Here's the example of the scratches on the work when I try to do it flat, and here's an example of how I do it if I'm doing it at an angle. This applies to plastic like this, but this is also especially good if you're working on wood. At this point I realised it was getting very dark outside and I needed to finish up for the day. I simply left all of the guttering in the garden but brought in all of my tools. I'm happy with that. Today is my admin day. As you know, Mondays normally are, trying to catch up from the week before. And I quite often think to myself, I've done no DIY today. What am I going to show everybody what I've been up to? And quite often I'll pop out and try to start on a small project like that, just so I can share with you some DIY. This is how my follow-along projects started, where I just needed to get a project done and said I'm going to do a little bit every day and share with you what I've done so far. And that's honestly how I get most of my DIY done, because I know that you're waiting for it. You're waiting to see something about what I've been doing. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel.